Yeah, not so bad. How are you?
I'm not too bad, thank you. Not too bad at all.
Have you been
Yes.
on strike this week?
Not this week, no. I've been industrious. Have you been watching the racist football?
I haven't watched that much of the racist football, to be perfectly honest with you. The I don't. I tried to watch bits of it. I watched the Wales game because they haven't. But it suddenly occurred to me I have never seen Wales in the World Cup.
Right.
So I thought, oh, that's a thing to watch.
I didn't
Um,
even know that they could. Did they have swimming parts for it, or?
well, they apparently they got in via the singing rounds.
All right. Oh, yeah, that would work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, something to do with that. But yeah, so I've watched tiny bits of it. I know there's been some quite amazing games, but I really am. It's a difficult one for me to watch, to be perfectly honest with you. Not because of the host country and because of all that, because we all knew that was going ahead, and when I was watching the Wales game, it was quite funny because they actually had an official figure of how many people were in the ground, and you could see that many people weren't in the ground. It's just one of those. Do they forget that there's television audiences watching these, for the corruptions and all that kind of thing? But FIFA, and I'm going to say this right now: bring the lawyers on, FIFA, because you're fucking corrupt. It's as simple as that. So a corrupt organisation. I mean, I'm a Manchester City supporter. We have terrible human rights people that own Manchester City, but one thing you can't say about them is the way that they run a business and the way that everybody's gone after them, including FIFA, and particularly UEFA. They're all the governing bodies are all corrupt. The game itself is corrupt, but that's the way it is. A tiger is a tiger, and they're going to eat you. It's so you've either got to accept that that's what the game is, or not at all. And so I kind of accept it, but I feel really bad for the LGBT rights and the fact that they were taking the armbands off the players. Because you sit there going, "What's a fucking armband?"
Yeah.
If you really don't want the world to think bad of you, just let them wear a rainbow armband, and nothing's going to be a worry. But money, 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 envelopes down the road, no armband, and suddenly it becomes a really big issue. So it's one of those sort of things.
I mean, I know that Qatar have got piss poor human rights stuff. I know other host countries have in the past as well. I
Yeah,
mean, Russia,
yeah.
they're a bunch of shits when it comes to human rights. And is China the same? I'm not 100% sure.
I
So
don't think China's held, but they've held the other things before. I think they've had Olympics and stuff. It's not. It's with this one. It's more to do with things like, 7,000 workers died building 8 stadiums,
wow.
right? But it starts before that because this is the World Cup. The World Cup that was given to Qatar was the one that England was going for. And
Right.
when it happened, there was a load of people when, hang on a second, how are they getting a World Cup? They don't have any stadiums. They don't have a football structure the way that other countries do. How did
Yeah.
they get it? That's obviously brown envelopes. And all this kind of investigation went in to say it obviously wasn't corrupt, and they've actually stated that they won't ban beer at the grounds, and they won't stop LGBT supporters wearing LGBT supportive stuff. And then the week before the tournament, the whole thing backtracked on everything that was promised. Just that whole kind of corruption thing. At the end of the day, though, this is where I have this kind of problem with football because I'm a football supporter and I
Yeah.
support a Premiership club that's got oodles of money, right? And it's not real money in the same way that the government has money. That it's supposed, if the people that own Manchester City didn't spend millions of pounds on players, none of that money would actually go to anybody else in this country, or in their country. So it's not going to go anywhere else. So it's just being spent on entertainment.
Right.
And at least they're employing people in the area, and those people in the area are spending, and so that economy kind of goes that way. So there is always a downside to where anyone gets their money from, I suppose. But at the end of the day, it's no different to Hollywood, I don't think. And I don't hear people complain about Hollywood films and Bollywood films, and people go, "Oh, Bollywood films are fantastic." Yeah, but a lot of them are actually made in very oppressive areas, and it's that kind of. So there is a kind of with sport, there is a hypocrisy that runs all the way through the sport, from the top end that says it isn't corrupt to the very, very bottom end with the fans that actually denounce places like Qatar. And then I'll tell you what, the amount of people in this country that are football fans going, "Oh, don't bloody human rights." If England actually went on to win this World Cup, you hear them talk about, they won't care. They'll change that argument because England have done well in it. So the hypocrisy is all the way through. It's like someone said, it's when the Catholic priests were caught fiddling with all the kids, You know, it was the hypocrisy that was awful, wasn't it? The fiddling with the kids, that was fine. It was the lying about it that was, that's the bit that most people don't like. So
yeah.
Sorry, you set me off on one. Then I do apologise. I'll get off my soapbox now.
Yeah, I remember hearing somebody somebody in an interview on telly was talking about Bill Cosby and saying that the worst thing about what Bill Cosby was doing was the fact that he was lying about it. And I talking to him said, that's not the worst thing.
drugging women and touching them up when they don't give you permission to, that's pretty bad. It's a very strange world we live in that respect. And it's funny enough, we've been discussing that idea as well, where you got on one side people going, oh, Lewis Carroll in the middle of the 1800s used to take pictures of naked children like other people did that got the new invention of the camera. That's absolutely disgusting. Now, let me have a look at the Daily Mail website at these 14-year-olds in bikinis. The whole of society has this massive hypocrisy along a lot of lines. And I'm not saying we need to stop. I'm not saying that at all. I actually think it's what we're built on. We're actually built on, as you know, most of our bloody conversation is metaphor. We crave stories. Everything about us is stories. We can't do anything without doing stories. If we're trying to explain, even scientists use it. I explain the temperature at the middle of the sun, and they'll go, it's X billion trillion degrees Celsius, which is also a bit like if you try to heat up a coffee in a microwave for 3 minutes about the same temperature. They always have to have a story to relate to because that's how we exist. So hypocrisy.
I mean, one of the things with scientists is if you sort of like look at how they describe planet atmospheres, and they talk about them being in the Goldilocks zone, they're taking it right back to our fairy tales.
Absolutely, because it's what we crave, it's what we do, it's how our language really works in a way. And I don't know if it's the same in other countries, but from what I can see, from the way that they have a tradition of fairy tale and, that kind of sort of like, just stories. They have stories as entertainment. Every culture has stories as entertainment. So I can only assume that every language also works. I mean, when I read that Things Fall Apart, and they're talking about that because that's set in Nigeria. And almost the entire language, the entire structure of the grammar is about story. They can't just go, do you fancy going down the shops? They're almost the language that is described in that book goes, yesterday I went to the shops and I bought some milk and it was a fantastic journey that I went on, so I might do it again. And it's just like, and it feels like a really over-the-top language, but actually it's when you think about it, it's how we understand things, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's just the way that things go. So it doesn't surprise me. I don't get surprised by hypocrisy because everything's just stories. I think in the moment, everyone believes what's happening in that one moment, and history becomes just a story. And, therefore, it will always change and it will always end up being a hypocrite. Everyone ends up being hypocritical at some point.
So we've touched on hypocrisy and racism. What have we been reading this week, Colin?
Well, actually, funnily enough, you know what? I think it actually ties in with it, to be honest with you. Because this week we have been reading the story Under the Pyramids, which was also called Imprisoned with the Pharaohs, not by the Pharaohs, as I named it last week. Under the Pyramids, which was originally credited to being written by Harry Houdini, but was actually written by H.P. Lovecraft, with Harry Houdini being the person who apparently came up with the story. And it was the owner of Weird Tales magazine. So in of itself, this story, the way it started was ghostwriting, which in itself is a kind of hypocrisy.
Yes.
Yeah. I say kind of, because if there's anybody out there that wants to pay me a few £1,000s to ghostwrite for them, please do. I don't.
Yeah.
I'll do it. And after this story, I think we can get away with anything. To be perfectly honest with you. But we'll explain that in a second. Do you want to hit the synopsis? Make sure we read the same one.
It's going to be embarrassing one of these days where we've read different stories, isn't it?
Well, I think it nearly happened once.
Yeah. Yes, it's come close.
Yeah, it has gone close. Right, anyway, so the synopsis for this one.
Yep.
He doesn't like catchphrases. That's the problem. And why am I looking over there? There's nobody in the room with me. Right. Told from the first-person perspective of escape artist Harry Houdini, imprisoned with the pharaohs, or under the pyramids, is a fictionalized account of an encounter that he claims to have experienced while on vacation in Egypt in January 1910. Enlisting the services of a guide named Abdul Rees, Le Drogman, Houdini is taken on a tour of Cairo and eventually forced to break up a conflict between his guide and a Bedouin leader by the name of Ali Ziz. Drogman enlists Houdini to help him settle the fight by way of a custom of great antiquity in Cairo, a boxing match atop the Great Pyramid of Giza. Houdini soon discovers, however, that the entire argument was merely a ruse designed to lure him into the desert at night and kidnap him. The escape artist is tied up, taken to an unknown location, and dropped down a deep pit. After dreaming of spectacular horrors, Houdini awakens at the bottom of the pit and eventually manages to free himself from the ropes. Suspecting that he is somewhere in a temple under the Great Sphinx of Giza, he travels through the dark in an attempt to find an exit, following what he believes to be a draft from the outdoors. Instead, he discovers that he is actually been heading further underground, eventually falling down a flight of stairs and landing in a large ceremonial cavern. There, he witnesses an army of half-men, half-animal mummies, led by an ancient Egyptian pharaoh Khephren and Nicaros, leaving offerings to a hippopotamus-sized, five-headed, tentacled beast that appeared from a hole deep in the hall. As he escapes, he realizes that the creature is merely the paw of a much larger deity in whose image the Sphinx was carved. Houdini dismisses the events as hallucination or a dream consequent of the strains of his kidnap ordeal, despite the resemblance he sees between Khephren and his guide, Drogman. Was that the story you read?
Yeah. Very, very similar. Yes.
Very similar. So, what did you think?
Right. If we'd recorded this yesterday, when I'd heard it once, you would have just heard me saying it was dull, racist garbage. But I listened to it again this morning whilst I was at the gym, and I mean, it's still racist. Yeah, I'm not stepping away from that. It wasn't as dull on a second read through as I thought it was the first time. I thought he was trying to build an awful lot of narrative tension, and with the first reading, it just felt like, oh, get to the bloody point. But when it did actually hit there were some unsettling parts. But again, it's my typical problem with Lovecraft. Whenever we get to him, it just feels like it's like you've got a racist uncle there who's just been sort of like telling you a joke. I've got to get to the point where I sort of like say, you can't say that anymore. And this whole idea that it's Egypt that's come alive and Egypt's evil, monstrous hand is sort of like trying to choke the life out of him. And that all these people, that it's a cradle of civilization that's responsible for all these dark things. It's just, get over yourself, you white supremacist dick.
Yeah, well, that's one way of looking at it. I'm going to disagree. I actually think this is one of his lesser racist ones, to be perfectly honest with you.
Really?
Yeah, and I'll explain why in a second, right? But I really like the really interesting thing about this is he wrote this before any of the Cthulhu mythos,
right?
That predates it. And what I think is it was very interesting is, you know, the way last week when we read Poe,
yeah,
and I said this was fantastic. This was everything I wanted out of Poe. It was almost like if you sat down and said, fed everything into an artificial intelligence program and said, write me something like Poe. That's what I would expect to get, is what we had last week. And I thought the same with this with H.P. Lovecraft. I thought this was almost parody of itself, a H.P. Lovecraft. You know, it gave you absolutely everything from a Lovecraft story. It gave me huge amounts of descriptive build-up, huge amounts of environmental description in the catacombs, till it gets to the point when he runs out of descriptions and just describes things as things. That was his go-to word. The man things, the beast things that were running down. You know, and it was just and loads of undescribable noises, and that's exactly how he writes it. They are undescribable noises. They are indescribable images. The things, all that kind of stuff. It's almost like he has these images in his head, but really genuinely doesn't have the words to get out, and he just has to almost say it and just say something in the way it sort of spills out. So I loved it from that point of view. I thought it was, you're talking pre-mythos, but everything about it was absolutely a H.P. Lovecraft. I'm a little bit disappointed that it actually came out and is now attributed to H.P. Lovecraft, because I found it hilarious that it was actually a Harry Houdini that he did a ghost writing of, but then it got changed to it's H.P. Lovecraft writing for Harry Houdini. But I did get off on the fact that it was Houdini. I got off on the fact that it was a story about someone famous, and it suddenly dawned on me that we don't have these anymore. You used to get Hawkwind novels, and the Rolling Stones used to appear in books, and you don't seem to get that kind of celebrity in wild boys' own adventures anymore. And so I found a lot of it thrilling in that way.
I get that, and I get what you're saying about it being an adventure story, a typical Lovecraft adventure story. But with the racism part, when he's sort of like when you've got this is my guide, and he's a bit of a dodgy guide, and then he gets into a fight, and then to settle that, they have got this ritual where they're going to go to the top of a pyramid and fight one another. It's just, for fuck's sakes,
It's oddity. I think one of the things...
not an oddity, it's a racist trope that it's just, I'll bet that's what they do.
Yeah, but that's what makes it intriguing, I think. And I know we don't use the argument of its time, and we do try and make that kind of point of that. But sometimes it's really interesting to see, nowadays we are filled with so much. We know that people don't box on top of the pyramids, we know that Enid Blyton sent people to the top of the pyramids because they used to allow people to just walk all over them. That was they weren't a sacred sites until we started digging them up. But the idea that H.P. Lovecraft in America sits there and goes, I know people in Egypt, obviously, because we all box, we all sort, ruggedness out. Men sort ruggedness out with, robiness out by boxing. They'll just do it on top of a pyramid, obviously, because that's what we would do. And that's where I saw the thought pattern. I didn't see it as, what would the savages do? That's not how it came across to me. It came across to me as a kind of like, well, if we had pyramids in America, how would we do it? So I saw it as a kind of, it is still working with the other. It's still a sort of post-colonial reading of it, as in he's not looking at the culture or researching the culture of Egypt. But I actually think he was more imposing American culture over the top of Egypt rather than making a statement that the people in Egypt are actually that rough.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from there, but we're still getting as you say, we've got people being sort of like pointed at as being the other, even though it's their country. And this is like where
Agatha Christie did with the French.
Yeah,
the Frenchman walked through Paris. Yeah.
We're sort of like, this is where all the villains are. And it's not just all the villains, but also they've got this nefarious thing going on underneath the pyramid. And this is all because they are, not normal, like us decent white people.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And like I say, as a post-colonial idea, yeah, he's not racist here. But I think the difference here is why. Yeah, that's right. It didn't feel as racist as some of the other stuff that H.P. Lovecraft has done, because he wasn't really using racial slurs.
No, he wasn't.
He
No.
was thematically finger pointing rather than actually going, look at that savage. Yeah. It was more that kind of thing. So it wasn't as overtly racist. It was more of its time in attitude, I think, which is one of those things. Is it's not forgivable, but it is a snapshot of history. It's more like a snapshot of attitude than than some of these other stuff. Because some of these other stuff where he's using the language of the time, I think is more problematic. With this one, I can write it off as being fantasist.
What you're saying is that this was more Jim Davidson on the Generation game rather than Jim Davidson in Panto.
Yeah, okay, I'll go with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was Mike Reid on Runaround.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
That said, and I know I've sort of I did like the idea that one of the themes that we've got within the story is that he talks about how pharaohs were mummified and how in one part it's not just humans that are mummified, but they've started making an assemblage of part human, part animal creatures that eventually come to life at the bottom of the pyramid, and these are the army. And I did actually like that idea as a theme. The whole notion that you've got this hybrid combination of human and animal, human and animal zombie that are chasing people.
And he was effectively just describing hieroglyphics.
Yes.
Because it's one of those things, wasn't it? Because he kept saying these are things that have been theorized, but we have never found any. So it was obviously something that was like that racist idea of, the racist science, I think you could call it that way. When people were reading the hieroglyphics, and actually I need to see, when was the Rosetta Stone? Because that was the key to understanding the hieroglyphics, wasn't it? But it was almost like they looked at these pictures and they made the assumption that they must have been doing this because they found mummies and gone, oh, right, they used to wrap the bodies up. And then they found mummified cats and went, oh, they used to do the same to animals. And here's a picture on the wall of someone with a crocodile head. They must have done this as well then. It's that leap, isn't it?
Rosetta Stone, 1799.
Oh, right. So they did know how to read hieroglyphics at this point. But it would probably been very much...
That was the year it was found. That's not the price on eBay if you wanted to buy a Rosetta Stone.
Oh, can we make Rosetta Stone key rings? Brilliant. Yeah, so I think that's what it is. I think it's that kind of interpretive idea. I think also the other thing that I love with this, I had never read this before. I said to you last week,
yeah,
part of this, and we'll go into that in a minute, the interesting thing is how this was written. I think it's very, very important in understanding what he has written. Because this wasn't H.P. Lovecraft's story as well.
Right.
Apparently what happened is that let me just pull it up here. It was the guy that owned Weird magazine, J.C. Pennenberger, and he was having financial problems and he wanted to get a celebrity endorsement on the magazine, and he was friends with Harry Houdini and wanted Houdini to write a story, and Houdini went, yeah, okay, I'll get involved. And then Lovecraft had already been involved with Weird magazine at this point. And so Pennenberger contacted Lovecraft and offered him what at the time was actually not a bad pay. He offered him $100, which is, in today's money is about $1,500.
Yeah.
To write a story based on Harry Houdini. And apparently, Lovecraft had written to a friend of his. There's some letters. I haven't read the letters myself, but I'm reading it on the line. But reading it online, he wrote to a friend of his saying that he was dealing with this prima donna. You may have heard of him. He's a magician called Houdini. Right? So it's almost like I get this image in my head, and I kind of want to write this as a play at some point, is the idea of when Houdini met Lovecraft. Because I did see a play when Salvador Dali met Sigmund Freud. And that was a great play. And I've got a book of imagined conversations. And I think this is one of those kind of things where you can imagine what goes on in a room. But the idea that he kind of walks in and goes, "Oh yes, I did a holiday in Egypt. Let's do something. Something happened at the pyramids. You take it over." And apparently, Lovecraft said to the editor, to the founder, "I don't like what he said here. Can I, do I have artistic license?" And he went, "Yeah, just do it. Write what you want." And he just went off and basically threw the kitchen sink at the page of this imagination of everything that he's been playing with, everything that he's not been able to really get in anywhere. He suddenly had the ability to write these strange, massive kind of eldritch horror images that he's not been able to get out anywhere, and he suddenly had license to do it because it was going under the name Houdini, and he had already been paid for it. So that's why I think it's so grandiose, in the fact that he didn't. I think he wrote it with a lot of passion, but not necessarily a lot of care.
I get what you're saying there. Yeah, I get what you're saying, and yeah, I do like the idea. Yeah, you need to work on the script of when HB met HH. That would be. I
might call it "Get Out of That One."
What about when Harry met Howie?
When Harry met Howie, that's really good. Yeah, that's a good title.
I think, yeah, one of the things that I did find quite intriguing about it was the fact that we got a celebrity as the central character, which meant that for characterization, all of the hard work had really been done for him, hadn't it?
Yeah, and even at the beginning of it, which I thought was really, because it's that classic idea, I'm going to tell you a story that's already happened at the very beginning. But then the way that you can almost tell that Lovecraft is having a go at his arrogance, in the way that me and the wife decided to go on holiday, but I let it slip who I was, and then there we never got any privacy, because everybody knew who I was. And it really doubles down on the celebrity side of things right at the very beginning. Even when he's kidnapped, he does that kind of thing, doesn't he? Because even when he's kidnapped, he sees it as a challenge to escape. And even the guys that have kidnapped him for no reason have gone, you've got out of every escape in America, but now this is Egyptian that you're getting out of. Try and get out of this.
Yeah, try and get out of Egyptian ropes. Our racist Egyptian ropes when we've thrown you down one of our Egyptian tunnels. Yeah, they're the worst sort of tunnels to get out of. Yeah.
Yeah.
Although, in fairness, I mean, when you sort of consider the size of the Pyramid of Giza, it was built in 2500 BC, and it was the tallest man-made structure in the world until about 1360, when Lincoln Cathedral was built. So, yeah, an incredibly huge, imposing monolith of a building. So, yeah, I can understand why he's decided to put him down there for that one.
So, interestingly, again, because if you remember, we read that one about being trapped in the pyramid. And they were using the mummies to
flower. Yeah.
Yeah. And what was really interesting is by the time this story was written, those pyramids had been stripped. They had been top to bottom gone through. People had even nicked rocks out of it. There's even sort of like argument to say that the shape they are now was not the shape they were when the Victorians discovered them. So by this time, that whole Egyptian thing had risen up because the treasures that had been stolen from Egypt had been starting to be shown around the place. Even to the point where Universal Pictures made the film The Mummy. They, the actual curse of the mummy didn't exist at that point until Hollywood came along and basically took the Dracula script from 1931 and rewrote it as a mummy. And, so that's where a lot of those myths come from. Only because there was big public idea, big public push for it, because only the posh people had been able to go there. And that's why Agatha Christie wrote about Egypt in that way, because it wasn't an everyday holiday that kind of went there. So they would have known at that point quite a lot of the people in the know, the Egyptologists, and that's why he sort of mentions it. I think I found a chasm that even the Egyptologists didn't know about. There was those little moments of going beyond, but there was also a lot of naivety in, I think, what was being written. There was obviously a lot of "I've never been to Egypt" about the way it was written, and that's why he went into this complete other world, underneath it. But at all times, Houdini was only hallucinating, and he made sure he kept telling you that, which I thought was brilliant.
Yeah, I suppose that's the one. Well, that's one of the many things that I didn't like about it.
But that's the celebrity, isn't it? That's the celebrity endorsement. Yes, you can use my name in a really weird tale, but I must never believe it. Because remember, Houdini was really into debunking psychics.
Yes, he was.
He was also a friend of Arthur Conan Doyle.
I thought you were going to say a friend of Dorothy then.
I don't think that film had been made by then. Yeah, but he was also a friend of Arthur Conan Doyle's, wasn't he? And Arthur Conan Doyle was really into spiritualism, and he used to take Houdini around. I found one, Harry, and this one will blow your mind. And then Harry would go in and cut all the wires and all that kind of stuff. So
it was because they actually fell out because Conan Doyle said, "My wife can talk to the spirits," and Conan Doyle's wife produced a letter for Houdini from Houdini's late mother, and apparently Houdini wanted to believe in this, and then realised it was written in English, and his mother was Hungarian and couldn't write a word of English, and just sort of like called bullshit on the whole thing.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
So you couldn't, if you're going to write fictional tales about Houdini in a wild, supernatural, marvelous way, he can never truly believe it. It has to be something else. It has to have a rational explanation. And so, therefore, to rationalize it, it always had to be a hallucination or a dream.
Yeah, but that as the final line to any story, it was all a dream.
Yeah.
Just fuck off. I mean, I suppose there were the layers of, all right, I'm going to keep telling myself it was all a dream. And I was going for that interpretation of it rather than, you know what, I had a bit of a dream.
I saw the last line much more sarcastic than that. I actually did see that ending line was H.P. Lovecraft going, "And it was all a dream."
Yes, I can see it from that point of view now. Yeah.
I do agree with you. It's a really naff ending to have everything be a dream.
It's shitting on the reader. It's as though, this exciting thing happened, and this exciting thing happened, and this exciting thing happened. And I'll tell you something else, none of it chuffing happened because it was all a dream. And, well, thank you for wasting my fucking time with that.
Which was my argument about premature burial.
Yes. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, and that was my argument for it. I agree. I mean, like I say, it's almost like this story is almost like a caricature of Lovecraft. It's all, and it's almost like the gloves are off. He was licensed to go for it. And I think it's the kind of story that either of us would come out with. If you had someone like, let's say, Williams, what's his first name? Can't remember. The judge likes to talk horribly about contestants. David Williams, right? Let's say that one of them came and said, I want to write a horror story, but I can only write fart gags. Right? So I want you to write the horror story and my name's going for it. You have free license. I think either of us two would take the money to start with, but we really would go over the top. We wouldn't try and create a nuanced, weaved tale of fear and sweat. We would spray the walls with blood. We would have body parts asunder all over the place, and we would probably go more than we would for our own stuff, because you were doing it for someone else and you wanted it to make that massive impact, and you wanted to almost go you've told me to write something for you, there you go, And if they say yes, then great. If they say no, can you tone it back a bit? You'd then tone it back. But you'd take the piss a little bit the first time you sat down and wrote it.
Yeah, I think I might. Yeah, especially with that particular individual, because I'm not a big fan. And it would
That's
be
why I picked him, because it's that ego.
Yeah.
He's an ego celebrity, which is what Harry Houdini was. Harry Houdini was an ego celebrity. You know, yes, he was a mighty fine magician, and yes, he was a mighty fine escapologist, but he was very good at celebrity and being that celebrity for celebrity's sake. You know, that personality. And I think that's what David Williams does. You know, he goes out and bees that personality and overplays it. And so we'd take the money, absolutely. We'd treat it with due professional respect, because the job needs to be treated with professional respect. So therefore, you'd get your deadlines, you do the right number of words, and you write it to an incredibly high quality. But you'd take the piss with the boundaries. You would go bloodier, you'd go more violent, you'd go absurd with it, you'd go over the top with the absurdity of the story, just to see what you could get away with, because you can always take it back.
Yeah, I mean, I just then thought, what if it wasn't David Williams? What if James Corden had got in touch with me? In that case, this would be a story about him sort of like wanking himself to death over scat porn. And
I'd say I'd probably write a story about someone who gets so angry in a restaurant because the yolk of the egg isn't yellow enough that he then just murders everyone in the restaurant.
Yes, that would work. Yes.
That would be a way of doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. Horrible piece of shit that man is. Yeah, allegedly. Yes.
Well, you know, like I said, I wrote a joke about him the other day.
All right.
Yeah, I said the kid and his dad are stood there at the parade. The kid says, "Dad, what's happened to the Emperor's new clothes?" And his dad says, "Don't worry, James Corden came along and nicked all the material."
Like it.
Yeah. Yeah. Very niche, but nice. Good joke.
Yes.
But yeah, so going back to this one, just wrap up from a creative point of view. I find it interesting that when you gave it a second listen, you gave it a deeper listen, it became a bit more exciting.
Yes, it did. And yeah, I'm not quite sure. Perhaps it was because I knew where it was going and I knew what I was going to be encountering. But it allowed me to pick up on the atmosphere, because the atmosphere is very well rendered. It's spooky. It's got a lot going for it in that way. And maybe the first time I was just, I don't know. Maybe the first time I wasn't in the mood for it. Maybe because that sometimes happens.
Can happen. But also, there are times when you do things and sometimes your own intelligence can get in the way, and you're trying to almost predict what happens. You know so much about plot, so much about narrative, so much about genre, and there is a whole. I mean, they say it's an hour and 12 minutes to listen to, around about 4,500 words. Well, probably near 6,000 words actually in an hour.
Yeah.
So you're looking at 3,000 words of that is setting up the holiday in Egypt.
Yeah.
And when you're dealing with things like, if you look at Sid Field's 3 acts, for example, or if you look at the story pyramid, let's look at the story pyramid and keep it on theme, right? Yeah. It doesn't do that. It has the pivotal point in the middle.
Yeah.
Genuinely hits, and it's almost absolutely smack bang in the middle of the story when he ends up down the well. But the lead up to it doesn't really ramp. It doesn't do this kind of ramping malarkey, because it's so almost like the first half of it is just telling you how much of a cock Houdini is. You know, that's really what it's doing. And I've got a guide and I'm doing this and I really don't care. I'm in another country. And it's almost, you could almost read it. I say you could argue that you can read it from a point of view of it not being racist, and that Houdini is the one that's being implied as being racist. Because some of the actual subtext behind it is almost like the Houdini is the guy abroad. Houdini is the other, going into this, into this world. And he's the one that's kind of out of place. And he makes a massive effort at making sure that you understand that Houdini's out of place, but doesn't think he is.
Yes.
You see what I mean?
Yeah, I get what you mean. Yeah.
So that's a really interesting way of looking at it. And so, but that's not how you would write the story. You haven't had any other points of tension in there that have really raised up and gone, this needs to be resolved, to foreshadow. There's no foreshadowing anywhere on it at all until you get to the point when he then gets tied up. And you're thinking, at that point, if you didn't know that this was a weird tale, you'd be going, oh, Houdini's tied up. He's going to get out of this. It'll be super easy, barely an inconvenience. Because he can, just paying homage to, because he's the great escapologist. And then he ends up in this Lovecraftian nightmare that he drops down into. So it is really a story of absolute two halves. One which is a build-up which uses realism around, the whole sort of concept, and the other half which just disappears into a complete supernatural, what people write off as being just fantasy. Although I don't believe in escapism being just a write-off anymore. I think that's lazy to call it just escapist. But it does go off.
It's not escapism, it's escapology.
It's escapology. Or lack of escapism is what was actually going on. That's how we ended up down the hole. It just goes off into this complete imaginative weirdness.
Yeah, I mean, I think there were a couple of tiny bits of foregrounding in the first half of it, where he sort of like says the Dragoman, how he says he should have gone through the reception desk or some authority from how it turned out later on.
Right.
And but that's as much as we get, really. And for 3,000 words, I would want a little bit more to sort of like tease me into reading the remaining 3,000 words.
Yeah, but I found it quite intriguing because it was almost like a travel log. Well, a travel log, wasn't it? It was just that whole kind of like it's just describing what's going on around the place, and this completely ignorant man walking through the middle of it all, which was quite interesting. But then you could almost describe this. I'm using the word almost a lot here. I need to get hold of myself. I need to pinch myself or stab myself with something every time I say it. Almost. You could argue that this is a portal story.
Yes, I can see that. Yeah.
Couldn't you?
Yeah, he's gone down the rabbit hole and he's under the pyramid.
Well, it only gets called under the pyramid, but he only assumes he's under the pyramid. Can be argued that he's gone into a different plane, that he's actually gone over to the realms of the Elder, rather than actually still being on this planet. It's possible to argue that because of the way he falls down an impossibly big hole.
Yes, there's a lot of impossibilities there, aren't there? It's an impossibly deep hole. It's an impossibly long rope that's led him down
then
there.
Impossibly covers him.
Yep.
Yeah, that he then has to climb out of, and then the impossibly hippopotamus, which I wasn't quite sure what he meant. I don't think he's even seen a hippopotamus at this point to actually say, because he describes it as being hippopotamus-sized, and then it seems to be much bigger than a hippopotamus.
Yeah.
Doesn't it? With the 5 heads. And then that turns out to just be the front paw.
Yeah.
Of what looks like one of the Sphinx, which I loved as an idea, by the way. I thought that was great. The idea that the Sphinx faces had been altered.
Yes. Yeah, there were some nice ideas in there, but it's not one that I think I would be going back to just because a little bit on the racist side, and I like Houdini, and he sort of like made him look like a dick, and
I like Houdini. I like the idea of this, though. I think going forward in terms of teaching creative writing, you're always on the lookout for tasks to do.
Yeah.
And that I'm on the campaign trail at the moment to try and get people like yourselves to go and teach sensory storytelling. But you need to learn more about sensory storytelling yourself before you can teach other people to. write
Exactly,
stories. I think this is a great exercise. I actually think the idea of going, here are 5 celebrities. I would like you to pick one and go and write a fanciful story of in the first person of one of these celebrities. Take out the aspect of having to create character as your protagonist and allow the writers to think more about plot, because you've already given them a character that exists that they will have a schemata for.
Is this borderline fan fiction then?
Yeah, in a way. But I mean, like I say, so I remember reading when I was growing up. Say there used to be the Hawkwind books, and they were all written by the same guy, and it was basically the band Hawkwind and the adventures they got up to in time and space. You know, and there were a number of them. You know, I'm pretty certain there was a couple of Beatles novels as well. So it used to be a thing, writing about celebrity in that way and sending them on weird journeys. You know, like the whole Beatles Yellow Submarine. You know, and even the earlier Beatles movies, there is a bit of a tradition. I don't even think it is fan fiction actually, because fan fiction is usually dealing within the world that somebody else has created, isn't it? This is purely taking the character and putting them in a world that they don't exist in. So you would have to take someone like Taylor Swift and turn her into a superhero, you know, or take her to another planet, or you know, that kind of idea. Take someone, you know, take like Liz Truss and just leave her floating in space. So you know, just it's an interesting idea, and I wonder if that's why, you know, we have this whole thing of. I mean, I like Strictly Come Dancing, which is all celebrity. We haven't watched it this year, but Heather, my wife, usually likes the Celebrity Jungle one. I'm just a celebrity, get me out of it. So there is a fascination of celebrities being in areas that they're not usually comfortable in. We like the idea of seeing someone that you know plays a character as an actor, learning how to dance, or falling over on an ice rink, or eating bugs in a jungle. So, you know, we do have that fascination, and I think that used to be. I think this is an early example of that. I really do. I think this is, you know, that whole using somebody else's brand to sell a completely different story that has nothing to do with that brand. And I start thinking, I wonder if you could do it, bring it back as a discipline, as a writing exercise.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, really. Yeah, that might be a fun one to try.
Yeah, especially if you could pick it right. If you pick a politician, you know, and then you could do things like you're not allowed to. So the idea is they have to be the protagonist. Here's a big one. All right, go into there. Take the Matt Hancock, who I absolutely loathe, and give that to a bunch of writers and say, okay, this is Matt Hancock. You have to use the character of Matt Hancock as you know him and as you think of it. Now, go and read Joseph Campbell and take Matt Hancock on the hero's journey. Now there's your exercise.
That's not an exercise, that's torture.
I think that's a brilliant idea.
But surely, when we're writing, don't we have to like our characters?
Not necessarily. I think that's the exercise, isn't it? This is, like I say, this isn't necessarily writing something that is going to be used. It's a pure exercise on honing your craft. If you can take someone like Matt Hancock and send him on a hero's journey and make it an entertaining story, it doesn't even have to be believable. In fact, the more unbelievable it is, the better. You're not trying to add layers of social commentary unless you want to. But the actual thing is, the rule is you have to take him on the hero's journey. So you have to look at every part of the aspect and every part of the hero's journey, all the way around to becoming master of both worlds. And you have to take him on that journey. You have to interpret each part of it to be able to write the scene, so that when he comes back, he will come back not the deplorable character that is here to start with, but a changed character, a changed Matt Hancock. And you take any character that exists in actual history now and change them through the hero's journey as a creative writing exercise. And if you can't do that from an imaginative point of view, I'm not saying you shouldn't be writing. I'm saying you need to go back and hone this craft, because I think that's I bet you could do it. I bet I could do it. And I think that would be a really, really interesting exercise to do. In fact, actually, I might do it myself with Matt Hancock once I've finished all these essays to go through, just as one of my sort of like playing pieces, just to see what I can do.
I look forward to reading that. But not as much as I'm looking forward to reading next week's.
So, Ash, what are we reading next week?
Next week, and I appreciate next week it will be the start of December, won't it?
Yeah.
This one's called The October Game by Ray Bradbury.
Oh, a bit of Bradbury. Actually, I think I've read that.
Yep. So, The October Game by Ray Bradbury.
I like a bit of Bradbury.
He's.
Have you read his book on writing?
Zen and the Art of Writing?
Yeah.
Once or twice, yes. Yeah.
Big fan. Big fan of that as well, Zen and the Art of Writing.
Yep, Martian Chronicles, and yeah. So I'm looking forward to this one. I don't know whether I've read this one before or not, but
it sounds familiar, and even if I have read it before, I'm excited at reading it again. And if I haven't read it before, I'm even more excited to have read it for the first time. So can't get better than that, I think.
Brilliant.
Well, that leaves it to say thank you very much, Ash.
Thank you, mate.
Again, another very good chat. Oh, and just to say, actually, funny enough, although I don't know why I do this at the end of things, I am currently archiving all our podcasts into audio only.
Ooh.
And you can, sort of, at the moment, get the first 2 episodes of House of Usher and Dracula's Guest on Amazon Prime, on Amazon Music.
Fantastic.
So we're on Amazon Music at the moment. It's still not 100%, though I think that might just be the cache on my pad that's causing that problem. And I need to look at the name, the Aah and Col podcast, because when you try and say it to Alexa, it doesn't really like it very much. I think it keeps trying to turn us into the Nolans or something like that. I go, play the Aah and Col podcast. And it goes, I can't find anything by the Nolans. It does something like that. But but yes, so that's on there. So once I've actually got all that archived up, and then sort of like send it out to Spotify and all that sort of stuff. So we will become a mobile podcast at that point. So people will be able to actually download it. And actually, those 2 episodes at the moment, if you go to wordsforyou.art,
right,
there's a section on that website called audio only, where those first 2 episodes are there for an audio only that you can actually download and put on your mobile device and listen to when you're walking around or driving around as well. So we're going mobile. We're taking it off you, not off YouTube. It will always be on YouTube. Honestly, YouTube, we do love you. But yes, there is an audio only version of it coming.
Fantastic. I've just sent you a link to the
Ray Bradbury.
Yeah, to Ray Bradbury.
Is it about a 25-minute?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought it would be. I genuinely think it's sounding very familiar. I'm really looking forward to this.
Good. Can't wait to hear your thoughts.
Brilliant, mate. Anyway, it leaves to say bye.
Take care. Catch you later. Bye.